Everyone loves the winners, but we're here for the players. The ones rewriting rules, breaking and surviving the chaos, doubts, pivots, and the messy undercurrents. Welcome to a podcast on polished players in business.
Let me introduce our amazing guest, Michael, today. Can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Thank you. Thank you, Uni. My name is Michael Horsley. I work as an advisor, non-exec director, fractional resource, and also a coach. I work with startups and scaling businesses to help them on their growth journey. Prior to doing this, I worked in manufacturing industry for many years and also worked in a number of US startup companies, helping them to scale their operations both in Europe and APJ.
I'm so glad to having you today.
Thank you.
You know, I just mentioned some keywords. These keywords, let me just summarize something. Always related to risk, uncertainty, hesitation. Sometimes it's more emotional, like lonely or like walking in the darkness, something like this. How do you feel about these words? I mean, why do you think people, the founders, especially founders of startups, always mentioning these words?
It's really interesting. I mean, being a founder can actually be a very lonely place. Even though you have a team of people, oftentimes it's down to the founder to make key decisions. So I think the similarities that I see in the challenges that founders have are, how do they balance vision with executing every day in the business? How do they navigate that uncertainty? And what I would call decision fatigue, and how they build and lead the right teams. So founders often struggle to still maintain the big picture while moving the business forward every day. So there can be a tension between that vision and executing. Startups live in a world of ambiguity, in a world of grey. It's not always clear. Founders are challenged to make high stakes decisions every day, which might affect customers, revenue, products. And they started a business. Making those early hires is really, really important. But sometimes you have to grapple to make the right hire that fits your culture at the right time for the business.
Okay, here's a more interesting question. What's the questions? For example, you can list 3. The questions that the founders always ask you.
I think they would be, am I focused on the right things?
Okay.
How do I hire the right people without compromising my vision? And what should I be doing now that I haven't yet done?
Oh, especially the third question is really important.
Because that's about, when you say, well, am I doing the right things? That's about, are there some blind spots that you've got as a founder that you're not seeing? And sometimes working with an advisor, so someone like me, can help a founder to make sure that they are aware of what those blind spots are and making sure they pay attention to them.
And the second is about the right people.
Right people. So a founder can't build a business on their own. So making those early hires is really, really important. But you want to bring in the right people that share that vision and work with and have the right level of energy and momentum. But hiring is always difficult because it's an emotional decision. Founders start a business and they make all the decisions. And as soon as you add another person into the business becomes more complex. You have to delegate, and you can't make all the decisions, and you have to trust people to do the things that you want them to do and do those things right.
So basically, we can imagine as a founder, no matter in what kind of industries or how big the size of your company is, people's always, have the uncertainty in their mind about the things they're doing, the people they're working with, and the environment they're staying in. And I always wonder, why? Because some of you already have the evidence to show you're good enough to having more investment, or you're not good enough, so your improvement is not that efficiency. But in your perspective, why people always feeling so terrified as a founders?
focusing for a founder can be very, very hard because you're juggling many, many things every day. You could be making decisions about pricing, product, hiring, what to do with customers, branding of the website, the marketing for a campaign, and also paying attention to your cash flow and making sure you've got enough cash in the business. And as you grow and bring in new people, hiring is an incredibly emotional decision, and you are opening up your business to new people that you haven't worked with before, and you can't be certain how that's going to work. And I think the third thing is, people always think, what am I missing? So because you can be very, very focused, but there could be things going on outside that area of focus that you've missed. So you do need to have your radar across that businesses. So those three questions persist because whether you're building an AI business or whether you're building some biotech business or some med tech device, those questions are always going to persist for founders.
And I noticed that when you introduce yourself, you play a lot of roles. Although from somebody's perspectives, they cannot, they cannot understand what's the difference between all of those roles, because it sounds like so supportive, so helpful for all of these business settings. But now I just want to know what made you, having this career path, what make you wearing so much hats?
That's a great question. I don't really think about it as kind of wearing hats. I took an intentional decision to move away from working in the corporate space to work in a number of different ways with kind of emerging businesses. So it was very much an intentional decision about working with organizations at times in their journeys that were interesting, and companies that are trying to do innovative new things, but also thinking about where I could have an impact. And I think people ask me about, well, how can you be an advisor, a non-exec, and a fractional person as well, all at the same time? And actually all those, and a coach as well. And I think all those three things, or four things actually, come together and work together quite well. Because as an advisor, I'm using my experience to advise founders about strategy or marketing or customers or process or operations. As a non-exec, that's much more around governance and risk and financial stability. But by being a fractional person, that actually keeps me in the real kind of operational world of work. So that helps me to see what currently is going on in the world of work, which informs the work that I do as a NED and informs the work that I do as an advisor. And also coaching, I use coaching and techniques from coaching to inform all the other work that I do with founders and people on boards.
Firstly, let's go through with the role that advisor. Firstly, how do people understand the role of advisor? What's the difference between mentor, coach, or even a consultant?
So I think the way to think about an advisor and a consultant, let's take that. So as an advisor, you're very much focused on working with the founder and supporting the founder, an individual kind of one-to-one level. If you think about a consultant is typically going into, so as an advisor, sorry, cut that back. So as an advisor, that is purely advice. It's not working at an operational level in a business. It's looking at having a conversation with a founder who may have this particular challenge and say, well, if that were me, here's how I might think about approaching that, because I've seen this something similar work over here, so this might be a way to address your challenge. But clearly, that's what I might do. The important thing is what the founder would do. So that's really advisory, focusing on the founder. It's very non-operational. It's not about being in the operation. A consultant role is very, very different. That's about going in to look at a specific problem, to help put some definition around that problem, diagnose why that problem is occurring, and then look at developing how you might create an approach to solving that problem and then implementing it. So that is very much designed through to kind of operation. That's not really what an advisor, it's not what I'm doing as an advisor. being an advisor may lead me to bring in a consultant to work with a founder to solve a problem, but that's not my role as an advisor to fix a problem.
Maybe if I am a founder, I'm more lean to just find a consultant because I really want this thing being sorted very quickly and somebody can help me to sort it very quickly, implement everything, rather than advisory. So how do you think about this?
So I think there's two levels to that, really. A consultant is probably coming in to fix something which is at an operational level, whereas an advisor, it's much more strategic. That advice is going to be around go-to-market, branding, process, the overall operation of the business, maybe things around financing the business, or maybe things around funding. Whereas bringing in a consultant is going to be much more tactical to fix a problem that exists in a business. Bringing in an advisor is as much about having a kind of sounding board and an independent person to work with them, to be someone who can listen to a perspective that a founder has got in those early stages when they're making some pretty fundamental decisions about how to structure a business or how to take something to market or how to bring in the next hire. So it's much more about the strategic decisions, whereas bringing in a consultant is much more based on perhaps a project focus or a task focus, whereas advisory is much more about the whole piece around strategy for the business.
I got it. That's really good. So from another perspective, do you think is there any possible that these funders definitely 100% made their strategy perfect? They just need some time and maybe money, and they can make the company successful. Do you think is it possible that they don't need an adversary?
That's a great question. So you're trying to do me out of a job there. Okay. So look, if the strategy's fine and you think that strategy's execution is good, then well, what does the dial on the business say? So if the dial on the business is going into the green, or it's in the amber, or it's in the red, would suggest that there's a maybe the strategy's okay, but the execution is wrong. So my question would be then, if I gave you the best team in the world, if I gave you the best resources I've got and I could find them, and I gave them to your business and I gave you 6 months, would the needle and the dial move into the green? So that would be an execution problem. But if you had, for example, a team saying, well, we're doing all the right things, we've got all the right tools, but we're still not moving the dial forward, I would say that's a strategy execution. That's a strategy issue, because you've got the best team, they're doing everything they can, but you're still not moving the dial forward. So to me, that would indicate a strategy problem.
The next words I really want to, mention is the external clarity. People always say that. But what does external clarity actually look like in practice? And can you share a moment like when your intervention created some turning point?
Yeah, so I think external clarity is all to do with the outside world. So when you think about a founder, he's built this business, he's got this product or he's got this service that he's launched, and you're very much in some kind of inside world until you start showing that product to a customer or demonstrating it or doing a pilot or offering that service. So then you're opening up your business to stakeholders like customers and partners and investors. And immediately they're going to see what that product does or what that service delivers. It sounds simple, but a lot of early stage founders might kind of struggle to communicate about what their product or what their service does. So, I've worked with a number of companies, but one sort of B2B startup comes to mind, and brilliant team, really strong product. Pitch decks weren't quite positioning the product with the customers, and it wasn't really resonating, and that was transferring itself through to sales not happening. And so the product really wasn't resonating. The business development team were getting meetings booked with prospects. The salespeople were presenting, but they weren't winning deals. So something was clearly wrong. So what I talked with the founder about was, look, let's just take a step back here and talk to me about the product like you would somebody in the pub that wasn't an advisor, that didn't know you. Explain that product to them in a very, very simple way. Tell them what it does, tell them what problem it's solving, and tell them about the value or benefit that the product gives to them. When you strip back that language, you can often then present the benefit of your product or service in a very different and more impactful and compelling way. So what the founder did is reimagine how they were kind of presenting and pitching, and over a period of 3 months, so a quarter, which is a long time in a startup, it wasn't just about the tagline of the product, but it was about simplifying the message. And over that quarter and into the next quarter, deals started to come through, albeit a little bit more slowly, but it was about getting clarity of what that product was going to do for their ideal customer profiles.
And besides advisory, I remember you also playing a very important role as non-executive director. What's that mean? Can you help us to understand the role?
Yeah, so working as a non-exec director, that's really about working with a CEO and working with a board to bring in independent perspective or independent oversight to the organization. So it's about looking at strategic alignment, it's about looking at governance, it's about looking at finance, the performance of the business, and also some things that aren't really exciting but very, very important, like around legal and kind of fiscal compliance. So it's being, again, that sort of external lens into the business from an independent perspective to gently challenge a board about decisions that they make or the assumptions behind decisions, and about making sure that as a business, that organization and the board are working in the best interest of the stakeholders of the business, whether they be customers, investors, shareholders, partners, consumers of their product, or the world in its largest context around social responsibility and things like that.
But when to bring it to the board?
It's a great question. I think when you bring that role to the board is when you get to a certain time in your development as a business. So, for example, a founder who's got a team of 5 or 6 people working for him doesn't need a non-exec. He probably needs a couple of strategic advisors.
Yeah.
So it's when your business has developed and it's evolved to, you've got a management team, you've got clients, and you are starting to formalize the way that you run the business and have kind of regular exec management meetings and regular board meetings. So it's about the time in that journey for the company. It might take place after a round of funding, or when you're starting to move that business to the next scale of its development. So when you're growing, essentially, yeah.
So what's a good non-executive director looks like, especially for the relationship?
Yeah. So I think as a non-exec, what I want to understand is when I talk to chairs or MDs in those companies, in order to make sure it's the right role for me, I want to understand what their challenges are, what their biggest obstacles are in the next sort of 12 months, where their biggest opportunities are, and what they're looking for from me as a non-exec. What are they looking for me to contribute? And to be an impactful non-executive, it's not about just turning up to a board meeting every 6 weeks. You have to work outside those board meetings, build up relationships with the CEO, with the MD, with the executive management team, and it's about building trust and respect with those individuals. And when you're in a board meeting, give them an honest challenge about, well, why do you think that's the right course of action? What are the assumptions that you've made about that particular market or that decision? What's the basis for that decision? Have you thought about this? Have you ever thought about doing that? And because as a non-exec, you bring to that boardroom all the experience that you've got to date, which I call kind of crystallized experience. So everything that I brought into our conversation today is from the experience that I've had. When I bring that experience to a boardroom, from my past experience or my past history, I can use that experience in a different context. So I can learn from that crystallized experience that I've got to adapt my experience into a new board and be impactful and help that board to navigate whatever particular journey it might be on. Typically in a UK business, and I'll say not a publicly listed UK business, but a small to medium-sized UK business would typically have a board which is formed of the leaders of the key functions of that business: sales, marketing, production, customer support, HR, legal perhaps. So the heads of those departments or the heads of those functions would typically be on the board. CEO would sit on that board as well as the leader of the organization that has the responsibility for the whole business. And that board might have an independent chair as well. And it also might have a non-executive director. So a board would typically meet once a month or perhaps every 4 to 6 weeks to review the strategic position of the business, the finance of the business, how they performed in the previous quarter, what the plan looks like for the next quarter, what's the hiring plan look like, any particular kind of customer feedback, when's the next release of that product or service going to take place, what's the next marketing campaign, and any other business-related topics that would come up. From a shareholder perspective, depending on where the business was and where it's got its funding from, an investor may have someone from his team sitting in on those board meetings, or more realistically, it might be a non-exec director, someone like myself. And in that role, as we mentioned before, the advisor is much more working with the founder. The non-exec is there focused on the business and looking much more broadly around making sure that the business is being run in the best interests of the stakeholders of the business, who are the funders, shareholders, and also customers, partners, and other stakeholders as well. So the non-exec role is very much focused on the business, whereas the advisor is very much focused around the founder.
So you just mentioned a lot of things about the boardroom and how they work with the C-suite, let's say. So can you give us an example where the board structure helped create strategically calm amid conflict?
I think when a business gets to a certain stage and it's growing and it wants to formalize the way that it's run, that would be the time to set up a kind of formal board. So, working as I have done with startups, I've been in situations where a startup has been through kind of difficult phase. It's had a lot of rapid growth, for example, and sometimes other priorities can be misaligned in that strive for growth, and sometimes that creates some tension between the founders and the investors. And oftentimes those meetings can bring up little bits of challenge and conflict. And I think that's a good time to implement, a clear board structure where there's an independent chair and there's a proper structure around having kind of regular board meetings with this kind of set agenda. It's also a set agenda, but it also sets out how you make decisions in the boardroom as well. And when you create that framework for that, it brings that kind of fact-based discussion to a boardroom, so that then decisions are based on a clear evaluation of data, and can often take out the emotion and conflict out of a board. So that's where I've really seen boards come into their own. And also working with an independent chair, if there are differences of opinion and conflicts that come up, an independent chair can help to sort of mediate those types of conversations and take the emotion out of the boardroom and focus on, well, actually what's best for the business, not what's best for marketing or sales, but in this situation, what's the best strategic way forward for the business as a whole. And that can bring more stability and more confidence to the board and also to the management team.
Can you give us some like small examples of what kind of conflicts, what kind of, arguments people always stir up?
I think the typical ones tend to be around where money is spent, and without signaling out particular departments, sometimes you see conflicts between sales and marketing around, how many leads are coming into the marketing funnel. We spend all this much money on marketing. Why have we not got more marketing qualified leads coming through the funnel that my sales team can then set up calls for and close business? So sometimes those can be typical conversations that might happen at the board level. And then there'll be ones around kind of hiring decisions. So a particular team wants to hire a particular role. Well, why do we need this role? Why do we need this role now? Haven't we already got somebody doing that role? So if those are senior strategic hires, those might be examples of things that come to the board where you need a kind of rational, unemotional conversation about, well, is this the right time to hire that person for this role? Where are we going to find that person? Does that person work for a competitor? Is that a good thing to do to recruit from a competitor? Would tend to be those sorts of things. You mentioned funding as well, funding and where to go for funding and when to have the next round is often a conversation that's discussed at the board level, which has, again, lots of kind of emotive things, because immediately you start looking for funding, the exec team around the board think that their teams and their roles are going to grow as part of that funding, and then it's about, if you got that funding, well, what are we actually going to do and where are we going to invest that money and where do we need it most? It's probably in product or it's probably in customers. It's probably not more marketing, but it's about how do we make our customer experience better. So all those types of topics are things that are going to happen in the boardroom, which sometimes have the opportunity to create a little bit of tension from time to time.
And based on this, I remember you also play another role as the C-suite. So can you tell us more about that?
So the role of a fractional person, and where does that come into a startup? So startups, when they begin, are really just based around the founder and 2 or 3 other key people in the early stages. But when a business or a startup gets to a certain stage, a founder will recognize that he's got skills or knowledge gaps in that business, and there'll need to be a little bit more operational focus around certain parts of the business, or in order to scale a business, you would need to put in some repeatable processes to allow your business to scale and grow. And that's where someone like myself as a fractional resource can come in. So, you bring in a fractional person who's got experience in a particular area of the business that the founder wants you to focus on, with a set of clear outcomes and objectives. And in those roles, I would typically go in there for a period of kind of 6 to 12 months to work on a specific area of the business to help to scale that, perhaps that operational side of the business or the customer experience side of the business. So a fractional role who is someone who comes in who really hits the ground running because they have the experience to evolve that function. You become embedded in the business in terms of its culture and its mission and its value, but it's very much focused around delivering to a set of specific tasks and milestones and objectives.
Milestone steps, that is really good. Because otherwise, sometimes people say it sounds like a hack.
Yeah, I can see why people think it's a hack, but I think, when businesses start out, the founders are very, very smart people. They're really smart operators. They'll get to a certain stage with a very small amount of resources. But in order to move something forward or to start to glue pieces of the business together, that's where you might need a fractional resource. So, for example, every startup doesn't need a full-time CFO or a full-time CMO, head of operations, head of people from day one, because they just don't have that scale of operation where you need a full-time dedicated resource. But you do need certainly a finance person who understands how the business is running from a financial point of view, both in terms of cash flow, revenue, and P&L. But in terms of those other kind of C-suite roles, you don't really need them. You don't need those roles from the get-go. So you can use a fractional resource which is flexible, effective, and also cost-efficient to help you to scale and move that business forward at the right time. That's not to say that you don't need full-time hires, but actually you don't need them for certainly a reasonably significant period of time in a startup as well.
And I remember you mentioned something about when the company is still highly developing, everything is very dynamic. So maybe, for example, one person for your CFO is not a perfect answer. Several different kinds of people as your CFOs align with your current stage might be better, right?
Yeah.
But does the investors also think like this, or they prefer have a fixed team to share the same vision, mission, something like that?
I think an investor is, when investors are talking to founders, they are first of all looking at the founder. Is this person credible? Are they a serial entrepreneur? Have they founded businesses before and have they been successful? That's the first thing. They're looking at the credibility of that founder. Once they've determined the credibility of the founder, they're then going to be looking at, well, this product or this service, what's it doing? What problem is it solving today? How is it solving it? What's the total aggregate market that there is for that product or service, and where is the founder looking to invest that money? So if we were to invest money with the founder, where are they looking to invest it? So those are the key things to start with. They're also going to be looking around that at who is the founder working with. So who's looking at the business from a financial perspective? Has he got some strategic advisors? Has he got an advisory board that he's thinking about putting in place? And who is the founder working with, and who's he got around them to make that business credible? Because there are very few, single founder businesses that an investor's going to invest in. They're going to want to see that you've got at least a nascent, experienced team around you to help that business grow once it gets that funding and kickstart that growth trajectory.
So for some reason, it makes me feel like it's better to find a part-time C-suite, because if this guy is really, fully experienced, and maybe as a startup, you don't have the time, you don't have the money to, support him as your full-time employee, but maybe you have the financial support to cooperate as a part-time C-suite, right?
Yeah. So it's a question of scale and timing. So what we're not saying is that necessarily that a business could get to full scale with kind of fractional people, but like anything that's developing, you need certain people that are comfortable working in that environment. There are people who enjoy the fast-paced, dynamic environment of a startup, which is always trying to move itself forward. Other people prefer to work in slightly larger businesses that are a little bit more stable, that aren't as dynamic, that are a little bit more predictable and stable. And when businesses get to a certain size, they're over that startup, they've built their foundation and they're starting to scale, they typically will need people that are used to running functions that are a little bit more structured, that have got a little bit more process. That isn't often what you find in a startup. So it's about finding the right fit of people to help you in your business for where your business is now. And certainly a fractional person isn't necessarily going to be a person that stays with you, because that's actually not what they do, because they've intentionally decided they want to work with businesses of this size to contribute this particular experience. And the other thing that you can do as a fractional resource is also work with the founder to upskill people in his team as well, to take on your role, or at least bring in and help to hire someone to fill that role when it becomes a full-time role. So it's that balancing act of, size of business and scale and what's actually needed at the time. And like any organization, the people in that business are going to change over time, which reflects the kind of changing needs and scale and complexity of the business.
Yeah, and here I want to listen to more about your feeling, your own personal feeling, because you had the role of a part-time COO, and before you definitely, I think you had some full-time COO in other companies. What's your own personal feeling about the difference as a full-time and part-time COO? Do you really feel the feeling is the same? And you're making same effort, or you have the same connection with the other? Yes.
That's a good question. I think in terms of working in a fractional kind of COO role with a startup, I mentioned this word earlier on. You feel like you're the glue, because sometimes in a startup things don't always fit together. So in the background as a COO, you can help to kind of fit and glue those things together, because what you're trying to do is bring a little bit of stability and clarity to a certain area. Being a kind of COO in a more mature business, the likelihood is you've got a team of people working for you, whereas in a startup it's probably a loose relationship between other people in the business, and they're not formally reporting to you, they're working with you, whereas in a more established business, they're probably in your organization structure and you're probably responsible for them. That would be the major difference. And certainly being the CEO in a startup, more things are going to fall on your plate, because as the business starts to grow, the founder's really always focused on strategy and marketing and sales, and everything else has to be picked up by someone else. And that typically falls into either the chief of staff or the COO, who kind of picks up everything else that the founder isn't, and your plate tends to get busier and fuller every day, because some new task that the founders just had to do gets placed on you. And it's a great opportunity to kind of learn in a growing and developing business.
I think maybe we can go further about your another role about executive coaching.
So one of the other things I do is executive coaching, and there's really two aspects to that. One is working with kind of individuals at particular times in their careers, and the second aspect of that is being an executive coach to a founder or an MD. So in the context of working with founders and MDs, that's really more about working with them on a one-to-one basis to help them work through goals, help them to generate more insight about their business or the way that they lead, and helping them on their kind of personal development journey.
Because I'm very interested in leadership, and a lot of our audience always talk about it. And I feel like one thing is really important. It's about the hybrid. It's changing the people. It's changing the way that people cooperate. So definitely, I think it have the impact of how the leader show their leadership. So, what's your observation about it, and how do you think about it?
I don't think leadership has changed. Leadership is about setting the vision, leading with integrity, leading by example, and being able to communicate that vision to your internal team. And I don't think that changes. I think that's always the case about leadership. It's about setting that direction and focusing on whatever that North Star is for that business, and what's the plan to get there. I think the difference that has been brought about by hybrid working is how you build relationships with people now. Because in the days of people working in a physical office, you were there with your colleagues, you would see the CEO, you would see the MD every day. He'd probably know your name, you might have a coffee with him in the coffee bar or something. That doesn't happen in the world of kind of hybrid working, because those ad hoc conversations that you might have at the water cooler or at the coffee bar or overhearing a colleague talk about a problem that they might have solved with another customer, you could say, oh, I heard you talking about that problem. I'd like to get 5 minutes and talk about it. You don't hear that on a Zoom call because a Zoom call is very, very focused. So my reflection on this and what's changed is that building relationships both with colleagues, but importantly with prospects and customers, can actually take longer through that sort of way we work today, which is through that computer screen. Because in the work that I do, it's really, really important for me to kind of meet people in person. And I think you can evolve that relationship 5 times, 10 times fold when you meet someone in person to meeting them for an hour on a Zoom call. If I get 15 minutes with people face to face, to me that's better than 4 or 5 hours on Zoom calls, because it deepens that relationship and it builds that trust much more impactfully. I think another interesting element about hybrid working is how do you establish as a hybrid worker your capabilities, your desire for promotion, to take on more responsibility, because you could, in an office, you could have those sidebar conversations with people about emerging roles that were coming up. Oh, I've got, in 6 months' time, there's going to be this role. I just don't think you have that level of contact or conversation. But hybrid working is an established way of working now. It's clearly effective, but the challenge for me is how do you maintain that way of working and still get people to be aligned around the culture and the values of your business. I think that's more of the challenge going forward with hybrid working, to ensure that everybody stays mobilized around the vision and the mission and the values of a business when you don't come together very often to talk about those things and embrace them together.
And I think a lot of understanding of people is based on the informal conversation.
Yeah.
And the learning, it's the same.
So that sort of informal network of people that can coach you and mentor you, it's not like at the end of a Zoom call you can say, hey Michael, that was a really good Zoom call. Could you be my mentor? Well, yeah, I could, but I don't really know you. So, but if we've worked in the office and we've had some conversations in the office and I've seen how you coach and support other people, then I might say, hey, Michael, I've seen you working with so-and-so. Really think you could help me and mentor me. I don't think that happens. It probably does happen, but it's much more harder in this kind of hybrid world to, I think, as you said, foster those informal, more casual relationships at work that you might build into something kind of more structured, which will help you develop your career.
Yeah. So let's go back to the executive coaching itself. Usually, what kind of questions people want to ask you, or could you tell us usually your structure of the first meeting, first 1 hour, how you understand them and their situation, their problems?
Sure. So I think the first time I would have a coaching session with someone, I would have probably had some, what I would call chemistry call before that, some kind of informal conversation about coaching, and to allow myself and the person who wanted to be coached to establish mutually if working together would be valuable. Because I also feel that as well as somebody wanting to work with me, I think it's important that I think I've got chemistry with the person who wants me to coach them. So I think that first session is probably an introductory session, really understanding more about them. And values to me are really, really important, and the values that people have and the values that they want to take into the roles that they do. So one of the first things that I would do is explore the 5 or 6 values that are key to that particular executive, why those values are important, and how do those values play out in their day-to-day role. And then it's more about, the real thing about coaching is it's really about giving space to people. We kind of touched on this earlier on, that being a founder or being a leader in a business, whilst you might have a team around you, can still be quite a lonely space. And sometimes you have difficult decisions to make, and you don't have that space and time to think critically about those decisions and get perspective around those and insight on those. So those are the sorts of things that I want to talk to a leader about, to understand, what's pressing on their mind, what are the blockers that they've got to making those decisions, and what's their process for kind of making decisions, and really helping to unpick those things so they get clarity and an understanding about how they're going to move that decision forward, or how they're going to work around that challenge that they've got.
You told me a story before. It is really impressive. It's about a guy who is a little bit anxious to compare with his competitors, but you just ask them some questions and you make the turning point again.
Yeah, I remember the situation you were talking about. So this was a who wanted to put some new features and functionality into the product, so that it was more aligned to some of the competition. And when we kind of took some time in a coaching session to kind of work through that, it became clear that really this was almost like a pet project for the founder, that he wanted to put those features in so that he did have something which was aligned to the competition. And really that was almost like a personal project that was going to divert the product plan away from the development plan that had been set. And when you uncoupled it, it was like a decision being made for kind of personal reasons which weren't really in the best interests of the business. And after a couple of kind of rounds of conversation around why that was important, it became clear it kind of wasn't really important for the company or the product, but that business was more important for the founder. In terms of,
It's not for some analyze that we need to occupy the customer by this new function.
Yeah, it wasn't really, it was really just a personal hobby horse of the founder who was so fixated on getting this feature in, when, the analysis of that feature and what that would generate for, other customer opportunities and generate revenue, it didn't really prove it would do that. And that was really just the founder trying to push something into the product that he wanted to be in the product. And it was it was almost like he got that realization that it was like, this was more about him and his ego than it really was about benefiting the product and his customers. It took some time to kind of uncouple that and kind of what was behind that, yeah.
I think after all the very interesting stories and the insights you give us, we partly understand why you choose to combine all of these different roles on you, and why you have this strong curiosity and the supportive spirit for no matter the startup founders or mature executives. But I heard that recently you're gonna have some new initiatives, and very recently, and it's even you're gonna come to Leeds to do something, right?
Yeah.
What's that? Please tell us more.
Absolutely, really excited to be adding this to my portfolio. Myself and my partner Pete Evans, we're going to be launching peer-to-peer boards in Leeds in September, and it's specifically defined for small to medium-sized enterprises and scaling businesses whose leaders want to grow and get more clarity and help them to develop and grow their businesses. So it's almost like a mini advisory board. It'll be made up of 10 to 12 people, and each month we'll work through a structured program of work around innovation within the business, go-to-market strategy, sales, marketing, operations, finance. It's structured, it's confidential, it's made up of non-competing businesses, so people have the space to talk about their businesses and their challenges. It's there to share challenges, it's there to work through problems with your peers, and provide some real world accountability and real world leadership for those people. It's not networking, it's not theory, it's really peer powered problem solving. And we're really excited to kick that initiative off in Leeds in September, and I'll be sharing some more things about that in the next couple of weeks.
Oh, that sounds so exciting.
It is, and I think it's a great opportunity for small business leaders to really take time out of the business. There is this balance between working in a business and working on it, and far too many founders spend time working in their business and not on it. And this is a real opportunity for 4 weeks a month. It's not a huge commitment, but sorry, for 4 hours a month. It's not a huge commitment to spend time thinking about their business and how to grow it and how to develop it and how to develop themselves to be future leaders. Really excited about it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. One last question, and this question might be a little bit tricky. If you have a chance to only whisper one sentence into every first-time founder's ear, what would be the sentence?
So the sentence would be, you don't need to know everything, but you need to ask before you think you need it.
Thank you. That's very good. That's